At the quarterly gala, my brother toasted the company our father built. "When the will is read," he boomed to the room, "the house on the hill and all of Meridian Hollage will be mine." I simply smiled, noting the date and time, another invoice to be paid. He didn't know a sealed envelope sat in our lawyer's safe, bearing my name and a clause that would stop a boardroom cold. I never argued. I was just waiting for the right moment. My name is Renee Callow. I am 34 years old, and for the last 18 months, I have been the acting Chief Operating Officer of Meridian Hollage. Tonight, however, my title felt like a placeholder, a temporary sticker on a door that was about to be given a permanent, gilded nameplate with someone else's name on it. The celebration was being held in the Sky Lounge, a glass-walled chamber on the top floor of the Meridian building in North Briar, Elmsworth. It was a space designed to impress, with panoramic views of the valley and the endless ribbon of highways that were the company's lifeblood. The air was thick with competing scents, the sharp, oaky perfume of expensive bourbon mingling with the faint, sterile tang of industrial floor cleaner, a perfect metaphor for the evening itself. Polished surfaces and a raw, working-class foundation. The clink of ice in heavy tumblers and the low murmur of forced networking conversations formed a constant, dull hum beneath the curated jazz playlist. I stood near the edge of the room, a ghost at my own feast, my back to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights of North Briar glittered below, a sprawling circuit board that I knew intimately. Every route, every bottleneck, every shortcut. My hand was in the pocket of my blazer, fingers wrapped around the cool, worn brass of a single key. It was heavy with memory, its teeth smoothed by years of use. The old key to the house on Crestline Drive. Then there was my brother, Damon Callow, 37, and dressed for the coronation he believed was imminent. He wore a charcoal suit that was just a shade too sharp, a bit too modern for our father's company, a company built on grit and diesel fumes, not slick marketing. He moved through the crowd like a conquering hero, his laugh echoing off the glass walls. It was a loud, performative sound, designed to draw attention. He'd clap a manager on the shoulder, lean in to share a joke with a junior accountant, and flash a brilliant white smile. All the while his eyes scanned the room, assessing, confirming his dominion. He was playing the part of the owner, the heir apparent, and most of the people here tonight were happy to play along. They saw the sun, the name, the easy path of succession. They didn't see the hollow space behind the performance. He finally made his way to the center of the room, tapping a fork against his whiskey glass. The polite chatter slowly died down, replaced by an expectant silence. Every eye turned to him. He held his glass aloft, a golden beacon in the low light. "Friends, colleagues," he began, his voice resonating with practiced confidence, "we're here to celebrate another record quarter, a testament to the foundation our father, Clive Callow, built." He paused for the respectful, solemn nods. I felt the key in my pocket grow warmer against my palm. Dad always believed in clear lines of authority. He believed in strength, in legacy. He took a slow, deliberate look around the room, his gaze sweeping past me without a flicker of acknowledgement. It was a move I'd seen him practice in mirrors since we were teenagers. The dramatic pause. "He always said a man needs to carry the weight of a legacy like this," Damon declared, his voice rising. "It's a heavy burden, but one I'm prepared to bear. So, when the will is finally read, there is no question. The house on the hill, our family home, and every truck, every contract, every square foot of Meridian Hollage, it will all come to me, as it should." A wave of polite, if slightly strained, applause rippled through the Sky Lounge. A few of the older account managers, men who had known our father for 30 years and still saw Damon as a boy in a costume, laughed a little too loudly. They were betting on the winning horse, or at least the one they thought was winning. But I watched the others. I saw the younger logistics coordinators, the ones who worked graveyard shifts staring at tracking data, exchange quick, knowing glances. I saw the lead dispatcher, A tough woman named Maria, who had started the same year I did, subtly turned her face away towards the window, her jaw tight. They were the ones who knew who really ran the engine room of this company. They knew who answered the calls at 3 a.m. when a truck blew a tire in the middle of Nebraska. They knew who rerouted shipments during a blizzard to ensure a client's shelves were stocked. They knew the truth, and in their silence, they were on my side. I pulled a small, black, leather-bound notebook and a fountain pen from my inside blazer pocket. The book was filled with my neat, precise script, log entries, fuel cost calculations, and other, more personal notations. I opened to a fresh page and wrote calmly, the ink flowing smoothly onto the paper. Taunt number 12. A man needs to carry the weight. It wasn't an act of anger, it was an act of accounting. Each boast, each condescending remark, each moment he took credit for my work was an entry in a ledger, a debt being accrued, and I always believed that all debts should eventually be paid in full. Just as I slid the notebook back into my pocket, my phone vibrated silently against my hip. I glanced down, shielding the screen with my hand. It was a text message. From Avery Pike, Thursday, 9:00 a.m., my office, and bring the old key. Avery Pike, our family's lawyer for 40 years, a man as precise and unyielding as the granite of the courthouse downtown. The message was the signal I had been waiting for. The final piece of the mechanism clicking into place, the key. Of course, Dad always did appreciate symbolism. The cold metal in my palm suddenly felt like a lightning rod to the past. The mention of it, combined with the sterile atmosphere of the party, sent a cascade of memories through me, sharp and vivid. I wasn't in the Sky Lounge anymore. I was standing in the upstairs hallway of the Crestline house, the scent of old wood, lemon polish, and my mother's long-gone rose perfume filling the air. I could feel the specific creak of the third floorboard from the top of the stairs, a sound I could identify in the dark. I could see the afternoon light slanting through the big bay window, illuminating the faint, jagged knife carvings on the sill. R&C, Renee and Clive. We'd carved them one Saturday when I was 9, after I'd spent the entire day with him in a truck, learning how to read a bill of lading. Damon had been at football practice. That house wasn't just a building. It was the real headquarters of Meridian Haulage. It was where my father and I spread out maps on the big oak dining table, charting new routes. It was where I spent countless nights, long after the rest of the town was asleep, hunched over a laptop, building the routing software that cut our fuel costs by 12% last year, a 12% saving that Damon had proudly presented to the board as his own strategic initiative. A shadow fell over me, and the smell of bourbon and expensive cologne cut through my thoughts. Damon was standing beside me, his back to the party, a smug grin playing on his lips. "Quite a view, isn't it?" he said, his voice a low murmur meant only for me. He gestured with his glass to the sprawling city lights below. "Everything the light touches, little sister." I didn't respond, just kept my eyes fixed on the horizon, on the distant stream of headlights flowing along the interstate. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that grated on my nerves. "Listen, Renee, I know you've been working hard, keeping the seat warm. I appreciate it. I really do. But it's time to face reality. Get ready for the handover." He thought he was delivering the final, crushing blow. He thought he was being generous, magnanimous in his victory. He saw me as a loyal employee, a dutiful sister who knew her place. He had no idea what he was looking at. He saw a placeholder. He didn't see the architect. I finally turned my head, my eyes meeting his for the first time all night. I kept my voice perfectly level, so quiet that he had to lean in even further to hear me over the din of his own party. "Oh, I am," I said softly. "I'm already prepared." My response to Damon, a quiet statement of fact, hung in the air between us for a moment before he scoffed and turned away, dismissing it as he dismissed everything I did. He strode back into the heart of the party, the conquering hero returning to his adoring subjects. I watched him go, the bourbon in his glass sloshing, and felt nothing, not anger, not resentment, just the cold, calm clarity of a plan long in the making. The Callow family brand, from the outside, looked bulletproof. It was a classic American success story, the kind they write about in local business journals. But I knew the truth. I knew it was a carefully constructed facade, and I was the one holding the scaffolding together while my brother posed for pictures out front. Meridian haulage didn't begin in a boardroom. It began on asphalt, with the smell of diesel and hot rubber. It started with my father, Clive Callow, a man whose hands were permanently mapped with the grease and calluses of a life spent keeping engines running. He bought 3 used Peterbilt trucks, paid for with a second mortgage and a handshake loan from a friend. The first company ledger wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a stack of spiral-bound notebooks filled with his strong, slanted handwriting, documenting every load, every mile, every gallon of fuel. He built this company on the road, sleeping in the cab and living off coffee and beef jerky. His only companions, the crackle of the CB radio and a worn photo of my mother taped to the dash. That was the authentic, unvarnished truth of our origins. It was a story of grit. Damon preferred the edited version. In his telling, and in the family lore he so carefully curated, there was a preordained order to things. This myth was forged in the red vinyl booths of the Ridgeview Diner, over plates of meatloaf and gravy during our Sunday night dinners. I must have been about 12 the first time I heard Dad say it, more as a tired joke than a decree. Damon had been going on about getting his learner's permit, wanting to drive one of the rigs. Dad had laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that shook his whole frame. "Easy there, son," he'd said, ruffling Damon's hair. "There's a Callow way. The son learns the wheel, the daughter learns the books." He might as well have been quoting scripture. My mother had rolled her eyes, but Damon's lit up with a self-important glow. He'd absorbed it as gospel, a divine right. The son learns the wheel. He conveniently forgot the second part of that equation, that our father spent as much time on the books as he did behind the wheel in those early days. I never forgot. Our educational paths solidified our prescribed roles. Damon was sent off to a private university 2 states over to get a degree in business administration. It was a 4-year victory lap funded by the company, a series of frat parties and golf games that he called networking. He came home for the holidays, smelling of expensive cologne and talking about marketing paradigms and brand synergy, concepts as alien to our company as a space shuttle. He dropped out halfway through his 3rd year, claiming the real world was a better teacher, a line he delivered with such sincerity that the board actually commended his initiative. Meanwhile, I stayed in North Briar. I enrolled at Elmsworth Community College, paying my way with an academic scholarship and a part-time job as a night dispatcher at our own terminal. I studied logistics and supply chain management. I learned about intermodal freight, efficiency ratings, and federal transportation regulations. While Damon was learning how to give a firm handshake, I was learning the intricate, complex language of the business he was supposedly destined to inherit. The real divergence came after our mother passed away. Grief hollowed out our family in different ways. My father retreated into the big house on Crestline, rattling around in the empty rooms, the silence a constant, crushing weight. Damon, who couldn't stand the quiet or the sorrow, became even more of a ghost. Rarely seen at the house or the office, he found his comfort in the bright lights and loud distractions of the city, but I found my refuge in the one place that still felt real, the place that ran on a rhythm of action and necessity, the Meridian Freight Yard. I practically lived there, in a small office overlooking the constant, organized chaos of containers being loaded and trucks heading out, the roar of the engines, the hiss of air brakes, the shouts of the drivers. It was a symphony of purpose. It was where I felt my father's presence most, not in the quiet, sad house he now haunted, but here, amidst the empire he had built. Damon's appearances became purely ceremonial. If a local news station wanted to do a human interest story on a multi-generational family business, Damon would suddenly materialize, dressed immaculately, ready to talk to the camera about carrying on the Callow legacy. When the bank sent representatives to review our quarterly performance for a line of credit extension, Damon would be there to lead them on a tour. Shaking hands and pointing at assets, a confident prince showing off his kingdom. He was the face, the brand ambassador. I was in the back office, running the numbers and preparing the reports that ensured the bankers left impressed. He was selling the sizzle, I was cooking the steak. My greatest contribution, and the source of my deepest, most private frustration, was the fuel efficiency project. For 6 months, I dedicated my nights to it, using the skills I'd learned in college and my intimate knowledge of our operations. I designed a comprehensive system to track fuel consumption in real time, cross-referencing it with route data, vehicle maintenance schedules, and even driver performance metrics. It was a mountain of data, but I built an algorithm that sifted through it, identifying inefficiencies we'd never seen before. I presented the initial findings to my father, who just nodded slowly and said, "Good work, Renee, keep going." I rolled it out quietly, a pilot program with 10 of our most trusted drivers. The results were immediate and undeniable. A 12% reduction in fuel costs, our single largest expenditure, over one fiscal quarter. It was a multi-million-dollar savings. 2 weeks later, I sat in the back of the boardroom and watched my brother, Damon, stand at the podium with my charts and my data projected on the screen behind him. He spoke of his new vision for operational oversight and his top-down strategic analysis that had yielded these incredible results. The board gave him a standing ovation. That night, I found my father in his workshop behind the house, sanding a piece of reclaimed oak. The air smelled of sawdust and old memories. I didn't have to say a word. He knew. He switched off the sander, the silence rushing in to fill the space. He wiped his hands on a rag and looked at me, his eyes clear and steady. "Don't you ever let a lack of applause get to you, Renee," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Men like the ones on that board, they listen to the loudest voice in the room, but in the end, that's not what matters. You don't need anyone to tell you what you did. The numbers will speak for you. Always trust the numbers." It was the most important piece of advice he ever gave me. It wasn't just comfort. It was a strategy. He was telling me to keep building my case, to let the facts accumulate until they were too heavy to be ignored. The house on Crestline became my true command center. While Damon was entertaining suppliers at expensive restaurants downtown, I was at the old oak dining table, the same one where we'd carved our initials, surrounded by stacks of insurance manifests and freight contracts, under the warm glow of a single desk lamp, with the rest of the house dark and silent. I managed the fleet. I rerouted trucks around storm fronts in the Rockies, negotiated rates with new clients, and approved payroll. The house wasn't just my home. It was the brain of the entire operation. It held the company's history and its future, and my fingerprints were on every part of it. Damon, on the other hand, treated the company like a social club and his birthright as a perpetual conversation starter. I'd hear stories from suppliers about his golf games. He never talked about logistics. He talked about the callow legacy, the weight of the family name, and the inevitability of his succession. He was playing the role of a dynastic heir, a character from a television show, completely detached from the gritty reality of what we actually did for a living. He loved the idea of the throne, but had no interest in how the kingdom was actually run. So I learned to wait. I learned from my father to trust the numbers, the data, the undeniable proof of work. I developed a new kind of calculus. For every 10 times Damon boasted in public, for every 10 times he claimed my work as his own, I would make one quiet, deliberate move in the background. He could have the applause. I would secure the assets. He could give the speeches. I would write the code that made the company profitable. It became a silent, one-sided war of attrition. He was fighting for the spotlight. I was fighting for the company itself. My notebook filled with his taunts, a meticulous record of his arrogance. It was a long game, and I was a patient player. He thought the finish line was the reading of the will. He never understood that for me. That was just the starting gun. Damon saw a company. I saw a system. He saw a name on the side of a truck. I saw the complex web of logistics, fuel metrics, maintenance schedules, and human lives that made that truck move. While he was busy practicing his signature for the documents he expected to inherit, I was busy signing the ones that actually kept the company alive. But my name was never on them, not fully. On the most critical contracts, the high-value, long-term agreements that formed the bedrock of our business, the signatory line didn't read Renee Callow. It read, Authorized Operator, and below it, a simple, alphanumeric code, RC7. To our clients, to our insurers, RC7 was a designation of operational authority, a faceless functionary within the Meridian machine. It was a ghost who approved every major capital expenditure, rerouted fleets across 3 states to avoid a hurricane, and negotiated fuel futures from a laptop at 2 a.m. I created the designation myself. It was a firewall. It allowed me to exercise complete operational control without ever challenging Damon's fragile ego in a way he could understand. He was looking for my name on a door. He never thought to look for my initials in the code. My most significant work as RC7 was the Blue Gate Protocol. It was a safety system I designed from the ground up after a near-miss accident involving one of our veteran drivers. The existing safety guidelines were a patchwork of outdated federal mandates and vague company suggestions. They were useless. So, I spent a month analyzing every incident report from the last decade, cross-referencing them with driver logs, vehicle maintenance records, and even weather patterns. The Blue Gate Protocol was the result. It wasn't a manual. It was an integrated system, a mandatory 15-minute digital pre-trip inspection, a real-time fatigue monitoring system that flagged drivers nearing their legal limit, and a strict, no-exceptions maintenance lockdown for any vehicle that missed a scheduled service. The drivers hated it for the first 2 weeks. Then they saw it worked. Within 6 months, our incident rate dropped by 90%. For the last 180 days, we had logged 0 reportable accidents across the entire fleet. Our insurance premiums plummeted. Damon, of course, announced the Callow Safety Initiative at a press conference, holding up a binder filled with my printed-out protocols as if he'd written them himself. I let him. Keeping the peace with my father was more important than claiming credit. For now. The value of being RC7 became undeniable a year ago. Our largest and most profitable client, Northlake Foods, had a crisis. A computer glitch had corrupted their inventory data, and they had just discovered a massive shortfall of perishable goods at their main distribution center. They needed an emergency shipment of 50 truckloads from their Midwest supplier to their East Coast hub within 36 hours, or they would face millions in losses and broken contracts. It was a logistical nightmare. Their panicked vice president of logistics called the official Meridian contact number. The call went to Damon. He was on a golf course in another state and didn't answer. The VP left a frantic voicemail. He waited an hour. Nothing. Desperate. He dug through his old emails and found a direct contact string from a previous negotiation. It was an email signed simply, RC7, Meridian Operations. He sent a one-line message. Emergency. Need immediate assistance. My phone buzzed 4 minutes later. I read the email, saw the scope of the problem, and didn't hesitate. I didn't try to call Damon. I didn't wait for approval. I became the system. I activated a priority override, pulled 50 drivers off of lower priority, non-perishable routes, paying them a hefty bonus out of the emergency fund. I rerouted the trucks, coordinated with the supplier, and sent a detailed logistics plan back to the Northlake VP. The entire operation, from his initial email to 50 trucks being loaded and on the road, took less than 90 minutes. The next day, Northlake Foods amended their contract. They added a specific clause. All operational communication for critical shipments was to be routed exclusively through operator RC7. When I told my father, he just looked at me with a small, sad smile and said, "Good, that's how it should be." He knew. He always knew. To maintain this shadow control, I needed a central nervous system for the company, a place where all the information flowed, where every decision could be executed instantly, so I built one. I called it Spine. To the casual observer, Spine looked like a sophisticated dispatch board. To me, and to the handful of trusted dispatchers I trained, it was the soul of Meridian haulage. It wasn't just software, it was a living ecosystem. It integrated everything: the real-time GPS of every truck, the Blue Gate safety logs, client order databases, fuel price indexes, payroll, and all internal and external communications. Every gear of the company meshed within Spine. It gave me a god's-eye view of my father's empire, and the controls to steer it. Damon was given a user profile with high-level, read-only access. He could look at the pretty maps and the impressive revenue charts, but he couldn't change a single byte of data. He had a window seat to a cockpit. He didn't know how to fly. Spine was also my vault. It was my evidence locker. Knowing my brother, knowing his combination of arrogance and carelessness, I built in a failsafe. Any attempt to access or alter specific, sensitive data sets, like executive payroll, historical financial records, or client contract terms, from an unauthorized user level would trigger a silent alarm. It wouldn't block the access. It would simply start a mirroring protocol. Every keystroke, every file downloaded, every change attempted would be logged, packaged into an encrypted file, and sent to a secure, off-site server, a server owned by Avery Pike. It was my insurance policy, written in code. The policy was more than just a general precaution. I had set a specific tripwire for Damon. His greed was predictable. He was always looking for an angle, a shortcut to the money without the work. I knew he was obsessed with the massive capital expenditure of renewing our fleet. We were in the process of negotiating a new lease-to-own contract for 50 next-generation tractor-trailers. The financial details were complex and highly confidential. I created a specific alert on Spine, tied directly to Damon's user ID. If he accessed the draft contract folder outside of normal business hours, between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., I would receive an instant high-priority notification on my phone. It was a digital snare, baited with the one thing I knew he couldn't resist: the scent of big money. My control wasn't just digital, it was rooted in the company's very history, a history Damon had never bothered to learn. In my father's study at the Crestline house, hanging on the wall behind his big oak desk, was a massive, beautifully detailed topographical map of the United States. It was crisscrossed with hundreds of lines, marked with faded ink. To anyone else, it looked like a sentimental relic, a decorative piece showing the company's growth. But it was a codex. The map detailed 27 unique, highly profitable, and often unconventional routes that my father had discovered over 40 years. They weren't in any public database. They were routes built on handshake deals with small-town way station operators, knowledge of seasonal road closures, and an almost intuitive understanding of the nation's freight patterns. The map was covered in tiny, cryptic annotations, a shorthand my father had invented. A small star over a town in Ohio didn't mean a depot. It meant a family-owned truck stop that offered the best bulk discount on diesel in the state, but only if you paid in cash and mentioned his name. A squiggly line through the Sierra Nevadas indicated a pass that was always open 2 days after the official state reopening, a secret known only to a handful of veteran drivers. My father had taught me the legend to that map when I was 16. It was the Callow legacy, not the name, but the knowledge. Spine was the digital execution of the map's strategy. I held both the history and the future in my hands. This was never about a coup. It wasn't about seizing a throne I felt entitled to. I don't want a throne. I want a well-oiled machine. This company is a complex, dangerous, and beautiful entity that provides a good living for over 300 families. It cannot be run by a slogan or a smile. It must be run by someone who understands its every moving part. My goal was simple: to ensure that the person at the wheel was the most competent operator, not the son, not the daughter, the operator. And in a world of empty promises and polished presentations, competence, like justice, requires one thing above all else: It requires proof. My hidden role was to ensure that when the time came, the proof would be overwhelming, undeniable, and ready. It happened on a Tuesday. At 2:11 a.m., I was in the study at the Crestline house, the only light coming from my laptop screen as I reviewed overnight shipping manifests. The house was silent around me, a vessel of memory and quiet resolve. Then, a faint, almost imperceptible buzz from my phone on the desk beside me. It wasn't a text or a call. It was a high-priority, encrypted notification from Spine. An alert I had configured years ago and had almost forgotten about. My tripwire. My heart didn't race. Instead, a cold, steady calm washed over me. The kind of calm you feel when a long-held hypothesis is finally proven correct. I picked up the phone. The screen glowed with stark, simple text. Alert. User DC1 initiated download from secure file path DC1. Damon Callow. He was in the system. The one folder I knew he couldn't resist. The multi-million-dollar proposal for our fleet renewal. Specifically the complex fuel hedge agreement with a private equity firm called Shellridge Capital. This wasn't just a contract. It was the financial future of the company for the next decade. He hadn't just viewed the file. The alert was specific. He had downloaded it. My fingers moved with practiced efficiency across the keyboard, logging into Spine's backend with my own credentials. I pulled the server logs for his user ID. The digital footprints were clear, like tracks in fresh snow. He had logged in from his home IP address at 2:05 a.m., navigated directly to the Shellridge folder, and downloaded the 72-page draft document, an act of profound arrogance and stupidity. He assumed no one was watching. He never realized the system itself was always watching. I opened our copy of the draft, the same version he now had on his personal computer. I'd read it a dozen times, but now I read it differently. I read it with his eyes. What was he looking for? What was the angle? I scrolled through the dense legalese, the clauses on liability, depreciation schedules, interest rates, and then I saw it. It was a new addition, something that wasn't in the previous version. Section 8, subsection C, ancillary fees. Tucked away beneath a paragraph about regulatory compliance was a single, innocuous-looking line item. A 3% advisory and consulting fee, payable upon execution of the primary agreement, to be remitted to DS Consulting, LLC. DS Consulting. The initials hit me like a jolt of electricity. Damon Sterling. I swiveled in my chair and, on a second monitor, ran a query through the Elmsworth State Business Registry. The result loaded in under 5 seconds. DS Consulting, LLC, a limited liability company registered just 2 weeks ago. The sole agent and officer listed on the public filing, Damon Sterling Callow. The address of record was a private mailbox at a strip mall 3 towns over. He was planning to skim 3% off the top of the biggest deal in the company's history, funneling millions of dollars into his own ghost company. He was stealing from our father's legacy before it was even his. The next morning, I scheduled a brief meeting with him in one of the small, glass-walled conference rooms on the 3rd floor. I wanted witnesses. Even if they couldn't hear us, I kept my approach neutral, my voice level. I placed a single printed page on the table between us, a copy of subsection C. Damon, I was doing a final review on the Shellridge draft, I began, my tone one of polite inquiry. I just wanted to make sure I understood this provision, the side fee for DS Consulting. It's a new name to me. He leaned back in his chair, a slow, condescending smile spreading across his face. He didn't even glance at the paper. He was enjoying this, the feeling of holding secrets he thought I couldn't comprehend. Oh, Renee, he chuckled, shaking his head. You're so good with the trucks and the maps. You really are. But this is the big league. This is how adults get deals done. A little grease for the wheels. It's a finder's fee. You wouldn't understand the nuance. A 3% finder's fee seems high for a firm nobody's ever heard of, I countered, keeping my voice soft. Who are the principals? His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. They're strategic partners, very discreet. You don't need to worry about it. I've got it handled. He stood up, smoothing the lapels of his suit jacket. Leave the big picture to me, little sister. Just keep the trucks running on time. He walked out, leaving me in the glass room with the single sheet of paper. He had just confessed without confessing. He had confirmed everything. I picked up the paper, walked back to my office, and sat down at my terminal. I opened Spine, took the version of the contract Damon had downloaded, and dragged it into a secure, Write Once archive folder labeled AP01. A small dialog box appeared on my screen. File upload complete. Mirror log sent to secure recipient. With a single click, a perfect, unalterable copy of the incriminating document was now on Avery Pike's server. The first piece of evidence was locked in place. The second crack in his crown appeared less than 48 hours later. Not in the quiet digital world of contracts, but in the loud, physical world of the freight yard. Lyle Henderson, one of our most senior drivers and a man who had worked alongside my father in the early days, appeared at my office door. His face, usually weathered into a kind expression, was a thundercloud. He quietly closed the door behind him. "Renee, we got a problem," he said, his voice a low grumble. "Damon." Lyle explained that Damon had personally come down to the dispatch office the night before. A high-end electronics client, one Damon was trying to woo for a bigger contract, was screaming about a shipment arriving a day late. Damon, in a fit of pique, had ordered Lyle to take the load himself and make up the time. Lyle was already at the legal limit of his driving hours for the week. He had pointed this out, referencing the automatic lockdown from the Blue Gate Protocol. He told me, and I quote, "To hell with the Blue Gate Protocol. That's just Renee's bureaucratic bullshit," Lyle recounted, his anger simmering. He said he was giving me a direct executive order, said my bonus depended on it, so I went. Fatigued and pushing the limit, Lyle had taken a turn onto an off-ramp too quickly. The load had shifted. He hadn't wrecked, but the sound from the trailer was sickening. When he opened the doors at the destination, 2 pallets of high-end audio equipment had toppled over, thousands of dollars in delicate, shattered merchandise. Damon's response was swift and brutal. He didn't take responsibility for his order. Instead, he stormed into the yard, publicly blamed the loading crew for not securing the cargo properly, and immediately put a hold on their entire team's quarterly safety bonus. "Those boys strapped that load down perfect, Renee," Lyle said, his voice thick with disgust. "I saw them do it. This is on me, for being tired, and it's on him, for ordering it. He's hanging those kids out to dry to save face with a client." After Lyle left, I accessed Spine's video archives. I pulled the high-definition footage from the loading bay cameras. The time-stamped video clearly showed the 2 loaders meticulously securing the pallets with straps and braces, even double-checking their work. Then, I pulled the telemetry data from Lyle's truck. It showed the speed, the exact G-force of the turn he'd made, a clear indicator of a driver pushing too hard. I saved both video files and the telemetry log. I encrypted them and transferred them to a small, silver external hard drive. I took a label maker and printed a single word for it: cicada. It was one of my father's old sayings. "Evidence is like a cicada, Renee. It can stay buried for years, quiet as dirt, but when it finally comes out, it makes a hell of a noise." I dropped the drive into my desk drawer. The final piece fell into my lap the following day. A memo appeared in my inbox, CC'd to all senior management. It was from Damon. It was a masterpiece of corporate overreach, a declaration of a victory he hadn't yet won. It announced his formal assumption of full executive authority over all Meridian haulage operations, effective immediately, pending the imminent and procedural reading of our late founder's final testament. He was declaring himself king. He had signed it with a bold, arrogant flourish. This was not a document the board had approved. It was not a power they had granted. It was a fabrication, a lie disseminated on company letterhead. He was creating a paper trail of his own delusion. I saved the email as a PDF and uploaded it to the Cicada drive. Financial fraud, willful endangerment of employees, cowardice, and now a fraudulent claim to power. The cracks were no longer fine lines. They were deep, structural fractures running through the facade of his crown. Damon believed he was cementing his authority. In reality, he was handing me the hammer and pointing to the weak spots. I didn't have to swing hard. All that was left was to wait for the right moment, and then to deliver a single, gentle tap. The air on Alder Row always felt different. It was a street of old money and older trees, lined with imposing limestone buildings that housed the city's most established law firms and financial institutions. The air here smelled of history and the kind of quiet, unshakable power that doesn't need to announce itself. At precisely 9:00 a.m. on Thursday, I pushed open the heavy oak door to the offices of Pike, Harding, and Associates. The only sound in the hushed, mahogany-paneled reception area was the slow, rhythmic tick of a grandfather clock, each swing of its brass pendulum measuring out a second of my old life and a second of my new one. Avery Pike's office was on the top floor, a corner room that overlooked the courthouse square. It was more of a library than an office, with floor-to-ceiling shelves crammed with leather-bound legal texts. The room smelled of aging paper, lemon oil, and the faint, sweet scent of the pipe tobacco Avery hadn't been allowed to smoke in here for over a decade. He was seated behind a vast desk, a man who seemed to be carved from the same dark, dense wood. Avery had been my father's lawyer and confidant for 40 years. He was 75, with eyes that had lost none of their sharpness and a demeanor of absolute, unflappable composure. He didn't rise when I entered. He simply gestured to the leather chair opposite his desk. The soft sigh of the cushion as I sat down was the only sound in the room. He wasted no time on pleasantries. His movements were economical, precise. He opened a drawer in his desk and produced a single, oversized envelope. It was made of thick, midnight blue stationery. He placed it on the polished surface between us with a soft, definitive thud. The center of the flap was sealed with a disc of hard, deep red wax, stamped with a simple, familiar C. "Clive left this for you, Renee," Avery said. His voice was a dry rustle, like turning a page in an old book. It was to be given to you alone. Prior to any official reading of the will, his instructions were very specific on that point. I looked at the seal. My father's initial pressed into the wax. My own hands felt steady as I reached for it. My thumbnail found the edge of the seal, and I broke it. The sound was a sharp, crisp crack, a small, violent act that echoed in the profound silence. I lifted the flap and slid the contents onto the desk. There were 3 items. The first was a sheaf of my father's personal, cream-colored stationery, folded in 3, covered in his strong, slightly slanted handwriting. The second was a small, black USB flash drive with a simple white label bearing a single, typed word, Spine Codex. The third was a thick, legally bound document, its cover page reading, "The Last Will and Testament of Clive Callow, Conditional." I unfolded the letter first. The familiar scent of his fountain pen ink, a faint, metallic tang, rose from the page. "My dearest Renee," it began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and the time for hard decisions is here. I am not a man for fancy words. You know that. I built a company, but I hope I also built a family. Now, you must protect both. Damon is my son, and I love him. But his eyes see a prize, not a responsibility. Your eyes see the engine, the moving parts. You always have. So I have made this simple as a bill of lading. Meridian Haulage is not one entity, it is 2. It is the machinery, and it is the people, the house on Crestline, the trucks, the depots, the physical assets. That is the machinery. The company itself, the name, the contracts, the goodwill, and the future. That is the people. Here are my terms. The one who keeps the operations will keep the house. The one who keeps the people will keep the company. It's that simple. I know you will do what is right. You always have. Love, Dad. I read the last line twice, a knot tightening in my throat. I pushed the feeling down. This was not a time for sentiment. This was a time for execution. I looked up at Avery. He nodded slowly, as if he knew the exact contents of the letter by heart. "Your father's philosophy was clear," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "My job was to translate it into a legally binding and defensible framework. Let me be precise about what the will defines as keeping the people." He slid the bound document a few inches closer to me, though he didn't open it. "The will establishes a set of fiduciary and ethical covenants that the heir responsible for the company must uphold. These are not suggestions. They are legally binding conditions of inheritance. They are, in summary, first, the consistent maintenance of established operational safety standards." He paused, his eyes meeting mine. "The Blue Gate Protocol. Second, the demonstrable retention of key client accounts through superior service and crisis management, Northlake Foods. And third, the adherence to unimpeachable standards of financial ethics and transparency, with zero tolerance for self-dealing or undeclared conflicts of interest, DS Consulting." He let the words hang in the air. My father hadn't just left me a letter. He had left me a weapon, perfectly tailored to the evidence I had already gathered. "The will," Avery continued, his voice dropping slightly, "contains a forfeiture clause, a tripwire, as Clive liked to call it. It stipulates that should either heir be found by me, as the executor of the estate, to be in breach of these core covenants, their entire allotted share of Meridian haulage, that is, the company, its stock, and all voting rights, is immediately and irrevocably forfeited and transferred in its entirety to the other heir." The sheer, brutal elegance of it was breathtaking. My father hadn't divided his kingdom. He had set up a test, a final audit of character, with the entire company as the prize. "I have not," Avery said, his gaze unwavering, "officially opened this will. The law requires both you and Damon to be present, along with the board of directors. For the formal reading, I am informing you of its contents now, as per Clive's written instructions, so that you may proceed with full knowledge." I leaned back in the chair, the leather creaking softly. The pieces were all there. The legal structure, the moral imperative. All I needed was to choose the venue for the final act. "Damon can invite a television crew and a marching band for all I care," I said, my voice as calm as the room around me. "Let him have as big an audience as he wants for his coronation." Avery's expression did not change, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Approval, understanding. "There is one more thing," I said. I reached into my bag and retrieved the small silver hard drive, the one labeled Cicada. I slid it across the vast expanse of the desk. It looked tiny and insignificant next to the formal will. "This is my contribution." "What is on it?" Avery asked. "The log of Damon's after-hours access to the Shellridge contract, a copy of the contract draft he downloaded, with the clause regarding DS Consulting, a copy of the state registration for that LLC, listing him as the sole officer, the yard camera footage of the loading crew correctly securing the pallets for the electronics shipment, the telemetry data from Lyle Henderson's truck, proving he was forced to break safety protocol, and a PDF of the memo Damon circulated, fraudulently claiming full executive authority." Avery picked up the drive, holding it between his thumb and forefinger as if it were a rare specimen. He looked from the drive to me. "And the USB your father left you? The spine codex?" "It's the master key," I said. "It's the administrative back-end to the company's operating system. It provides irrefutable proof that the data on the Cicada drive is unaltered, drawn directly from the system's core logs." My father had provided the law. I had provided the evidence, and together, they had built a perfect trap. The detonator was set. All that was needed was the right room, the right audience, and the right time to push the button. Avery placed the Cicada drive next to the blue envelope, two silent packets of information that would soon make a very loud noise. He nodded once, a final, minute confirmation. The meeting was over. Leaving Avery Pike's office was like stepping out of a time capsule into the chaotic present, the weight of the law, the gravity of my father's final wishes, had settled onto my shoulders, not as a burden, but as a mantle of cold, clear purpose. The time for quiet observation was over. It was time to set the table. An execution, after all, is nothing without meticulous planning. For the next 5 days, my office became a war room. The large whiteboard, usually covered in route logistics and fuel cost projections, was wiped clean. I didn't use markers. I used a series of color-coded sticky notes, moving them around like a general positioning troops on a battlefield map. The first move was to create the battlefield itself. I sent out a company-wide calendar invitation for a mandatory all-hands meeting and Q3 board review. The pretext was a thorough review of our operational safety performance, a topic so deeply in my domain that Damon wouldn't give it a second thought. It was the perfect Trojan horse, a mundane corporate obligation carrying a declaration of war. I scheduled it for the following Tuesday at 11 a.m. sharp. Next, I assembled the witnesses, my jury. This required a more delicate touch than a simple calendar invite. I personally called David Renwick, the Vice President of Logistics for Northlake Foods. I framed it as a moment of partnership. "David," I said, my voice warm and professional, "we're holding a company-wide meeting to spotlight our commitment to safety and reliability. Given our long relationship, it would mean a great deal to our team if you could say a few words, just a minute or two, about what our Blue Gate protocol means to you as a client." He agreed instantly, happy to champion the system that had saved him millions. One juror seated. The second call was to Frank Miller, the gruff, no-nonsense head of the drivers' union. "Frank, management is holding an all-hands next week. I want to make sure the drivers' voices are heard. I'm reserving a block of seats for you and your reps, right at the front." He was suspicious at first, as he always was, but the offer of a prime spot at a board-level meeting was unprecedented. "We'll be there," he grunted. The voice of the people was now on the witness list. Finally, I sent a formal email to our independent auditing firm, Mayridge & Company. I invited the senior partner overseeing our account, a woman named Carol Albright, to attend the meeting as a neutral observer. The stated reason was to provide the board with real-time context during our review of Q3 financial controls and transparency. An impartial financial expert was now in play. With the audience secured, I focused on the weapon. I had a brief, closed-door meeting with our head of IT, a sharp young woman named Sarah, whom I had personally mentored. I kept my instructions simple and vague. "Sarah, I need to be able to project the spine dashboard to the main screen in the harbor room during Tuesday's meeting." I told her, "I need a direct, one-click link from my terminal. No lag. Treat it as a test of our emergency response systems." She nodded. No questions asked. My control over the company's nervous system was absolute, and she was one of the few who understood that. The digital artillery was now aimed and ready to fire. The most crucial step was baiting the target. I found Damon in his office, feet up on his desk, scrolling through a catalog of luxury watches on his computer. I adopted a tone of deferential helpfulness. "Damon, I've just scheduled the Q3 all hands. I know it's short notice, but since it's the last meeting before, the board and I thought it would be the perfect platform for you." His eyes lit up, the allure of a spotlight overriding any suspicion. "Platform for what?" "To lay out your vision," I said, selling the lie with a sincere expression. "We're giving you the keynote slot. 20 minutes, all yours. I've even given it a working title. A vision of Meridian under new leadership. This is your moment to set the tone for the future." His ego swelled before my eyes. He swung his feet off the desk and stood up, already composing his speech in his head. "Good. Excellent. It's about time. Make sure the lighting is right, and I want a podium, not just a handheld mic." "Of course," I said. The bait was taken. The choice of venue was as deliberate as every other element. I didn't book the main boardroom, a dark, wood-paneled room that reeked of the old guard. Instead, I chose the harbor room. It was a large, modern space, with a single wall of floor-to-ceiling glass that provided a panoramic view of the entire Meridian freight yard. As we talked about the company's future, the living, breathing reality of the company, drivers in orange vests performing pre-trip inspections, mechanics working on engines, trucks rolling in and out in a constant, powerful ballet, would be our silent, unblinking backdrop. It would be a constant, visual reminder of what this was all about. I confirmed the final legal arrangements in a brief, encrypted call with Avery Pike. He would arrive at 10:55 a.m. He would be carrying a locked, sealed briefcase containing my father's will. He had also, at my request, formally engaged the services of a state-certified notary public, an impartial officer of the court, who would attend to create a legally unimpeachable record of the proceedings. Every I would be dotted, every T crossed. The narrative of the meeting needed to be framed from the very first second. I sent a short text to Lyle Henderson. Lyle, I've scheduled you for a 60-second opening statement at the meeting. Topic: the Blue Gate Protocol. Just speak from the heart. Tell them what it means to you and the other drivers. His reply was immediate. You got it. Renee. The first voice the room would hear would be the voice of a respected driver, speaking about the importance of safety, the very principle Damon held in contempt. On Monday afternoon, the day before the meeting, I handled the physical evidence. I sat alone in my office and printed 5 pristine copies of the relevant pages from the Shellridge Capital contract, with a ruler and a yellow highlighter. I drew a single, sharp, clean line under the clause pertaining to the 3% fee for DS Consulting, LLC. I placed the documents in 5 unmarked manila folders. My final act of preparation was to create the last slide of the short presentation I would give. I opened a new slide deck. It had only one slide. I imported a high-resolution scan I had made of the final lines of my father's letter. The image was stark against the white background. His familiar, strong handwriting, the way the blue fountain pen ink had feathered slightly on the thick, cotton paper. It simply said, "The one who keeps the people will keep the company." With everything in place, I turned back to my whiteboard. The sticky notes formed a perfect, unalterable timeline. 11:00 a.m. Meeting commences. 11:01 a.m. Lyle Henderson. Safety statement. 11:03 a.m. Renee Callow. Q3. Operational review. 11:10 a.m. Damon Callow. Keynote address. Beside the final entry, I drew a single red star. 11:28 a.m. Espad. This was my projected moment of maximum arrogance, the point in his speech where his promises of a new era would reach their crescendo. This was 0 hour. The moment the Trojan horse would open, the table was set, the guests were invited, the feast was about to begin. The room was charged with a tense, expectant energy. Board members settled into their high-backed chairs, whispering amongst themselves. In the front row, David Renwick of Northlake Foods sat beside Carol Albright, the auditor from Mayridge, and Frank Miller, the union head, who looked as comfortable as a bear in a tuxedo. Behind them, the room was filled with the men and women who were the true heart of Meridian haulage, the drivers, the dispatchers, the mechanics, their faces a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Through the great glass wall of the harbor room, the yard bustled with activity, a silent, powerful testament to the work they did every day. Avery Pike and a stern-faced woman I presumed was the notary public sat at a small, separate table, a single locked briefcase between them. After Lyle's brief, powerful words on safety and my own dry, data-heavy review of our quarterly performance, it was Damon's turn. He strode to the podium with the easy confidence of a man who owned the world and was merely waiting for the paperwork to be filed. The lights dimmed slightly, and the large screen behind him lit up. It was a photograph of the house on Crestline Drive, shot at sunset, glowing like a palace. Superimposed over the image were 3 words in a bold, proprietary font: ownership, inevitably, mine. A low murmur rippled through the audience. Damon beamed, soaking it in. He launched into his vision, a speech filled with empty jargon about synergy, disruption, and leveraging assets. It was a performance, and he was the star. Then, about 15 minutes in, he arrived at the heart of his plan. "The reality is," he announced, leaning into the microphone, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial tone, "that for too long, Meridian has been held back by bureaucracy, by red tape. To truly unlock our potential and maximize shareholder value, we need to be leaner, faster, and more aggressive." He paused for dramatic effect. "And that starts with cutting the fat. We are going to eliminate the redundant, time-wasting, and frankly costly safety procedures that are slowing our drivers down and killing our profit margins." A profound, deathly silence fell over the back half of the room. I saw Frank Miller's knuckles turn white where he gripped the arms of his chair. I saw Lyle Henderson shake his head slowly, a look of deep, personal betrayal on his face. David Renwick's friendly expression hardened into a frown of concern. Damon, blinded by his own brilliance, didn't notice. He had just publicly announced his intention to violate the most sacred covenant my father had left. The clock on the wall read 11:28 a.m., 0 hour. I let his words hang in the dead air for a full 3 seconds. Then, from my seat at the table, I leaned toward my microphone. My voice was quiet, but in the silence, it carried to every corner of the room. "Damon, forgive me. Before you move on, would you allow me 90 seconds to provide the board with some data on the very procedures you're referring to?" He was visibly annoyed at the interruption, but in front of the board and our guests, he couldn't refuse. He gave a magnanimous, dismissive wave. "Of course, Renee. By all means, present your data." I didn't stand. I simply reached down and pressed a single, pre-configured key on the laptop in front of me. Instantly, the image of the Crestline house on the main screen vanished, replaced by the crisp, live interface of the spine dashboard. On the left, a line graph showed Meridian's accident rate over the past 2 years. It was a steep, dramatic drop, hitting 0 and flatlining for the past 180 days, precisely when the Blue Gate Protocol was implemented. On the right, a window popped up, displaying an email. The sender, David Renwick, Northlake Foods. The text was highlighted. "Your commitment to safety, managed by operator RC7, is the primary reason we consider Meridian our most trusted partner." Before Damon could process what was happening, I pressed the key again. The screen changed. Now it displayed a simple, stark system log. A single line was illuminated in red. "User, DC1, action, file download, path/contracts fleet, renewal hedge and capital draft 3.4. Timestamp 02/11/13. ESAT." I clicked one last time. The screen split. On one side was the page from the downloaded contract. The 3% fee to DS Consulting, LLC highlighted in brilliant yellow. On the other side was the official Elmsworth State Business registration for that LLC, and there, in black and white, listed as the sole registered agent, was a name everyone in the room knew: Damon Sterling Callow. The silence in the room was no longer just quiet. It was a physical pressure. Damon, who had been glowing with triumph moments before, was now pale, a sheen of sweat instantly visible on his brow. This is a misunderstanding," he stammered, his voice losing its confident timbre. "DS Consulting it's a necessary advisory body, a standard part of complex negotiations." I didn't respond to him. Instead, I turned my gaze to the front row. "Ms. Albright," I said, my voice still calm and level. "As our independent auditor, could you offer your professional opinion on an executive arranging a 3% fee, paid by the company, to a shell corporation he secretly owns and has not disclosed to the board?" Carol Albright stood, her expression grim. Her voice was clinical and devastating. "An undisclosed related party transaction of this nature is a profound conflict of interest," she stated clearly. "It constitutes a serious breach of a corporate officer's fiduciary duty to the company and its shareholders." That was the signal. Avery Pike rose from his table. the sound of his chair scraping against the floorboards echoing like a gunshot. He walked to the head of the boardroom table and placed the locked briefcase upon it. The sharp metallic clicks of the latches snapping open were the loudest sounds I had ever heard. He withdrew the thick, sealed document. "In light of the information that has just been presented," Avery announced, his voice carrying the full weight of the law, "I believe it is my duty as executor to dispense with the remainder of the agenda and proceed with the formal reading of the last will and testament of Clive Callow." A wave of shock went through the board members. Avery handed the will to the notary public beside him. She stood, cleared her throat, and began to read in a clear, emotionless monotone, citing the legal establishment of the estate. She read through the initial bequests. Then she arrived at the core of the document. She read the clauses defining the covenants of stewardship, the commitment to safety, the retention of clients, and the adherence to unimpeachable financial ethics. And then, she read the forfeiture clause. Should either designated heir be found by the executor to be in breach of these stated covenants, she read, their entire allotted share of the Meridian Haulage Company, including all stock, titles, and voting rights, is immediately and irrevocably forfeited and transferred in its entirety to the non-breaching heir. Before the notary could even sit down, David Renwick of Northlake Foods was on his feet. "Let me be perfectly clear for the record," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "Our 9-figure contract with this company is predicated on the operational excellence we have experienced under RC7. If Mr. Callow's stated vision of abandoning safety protocols is the future of Meridian, Northlake Foods will be exercising the termination clause in our contract, effective immediately." The room was spinning out of Damon's control. Every pillar of his world was collapsing, one by one. He looked wildly around the room, his face a mask of disbelief and panic. His voice cracked, rising in desperation. "No, you can't. My father, he would never. He wanted me to have this company." Avery Pike did not argue. He simply picked up the folded, handwritten letter from my father. He walked slowly, deliberately, around the table until he was standing directly in front of Damon at the podium. He didn't hand it to him. He held it up for Damon to see. The familiar, strong handwriting a ghost at the feast. And in the crushing silence, Avery read the last line aloud, his voice carrying not malice, but the simple, unalterable weight of my father's final judgment. "Damon," he read, his voice clear and steady, "a man who keeps his promises to his drivers is the only man worthy of keeping his hands on the wheel." My father's words, spoken by Avery Pike, hung in the air like a final, unanswerable judgment. Damon stood frozen at the podium, his face a canvas of disbelief, staring at the handwritten letter as if it were a ghost. The furious energy that had propelled the last 5 minutes of the meeting dissipated, leaving a heavy, ringing silence in its wake. The storm had broken. This was the quiet aftermath. In that quiet, Avery moved with deliberate grace. He retrieved the letter, folded it carefully, and returned to the head of the table. His movements were the only ones in the room. Everyone else seemed to be holding their breath. With the silent formality of a ritual, he slid 2 documents across the polished glass tabletop toward me. They stopped directly in front of my hands. One was a multi-page legal instrument, dense with the language of forfeiture and transfer. The other was the deed to the house on Crestline Drive, its title now irrevocably tied to the first document, the company and the house, bound together by my father's final logic. I looked down at the signature lines, at the space waiting for my name, but before I picked up the pen, I reached into the pocket of my blazer and drew out the old worn brass key. I held it for a moment, its familiar weight a comfort in my palm. Then, I placed it gently on the glass table. The sound, a single, dry clink, was unnaturally loud in the silent room. It was the only sound. I looked not at the board members, but past them, to the drivers and dispatchers still standing in the back. "My father's will states that the one who keeps the operations keeps the house," I said, my voice steady and clear. The machinery and the home. I am accepting this house, not as a prize, but as a promise to keep the heart of this company, the operations that keep you all safe, running from its true headquarters. I looked at Lyle, and he gave a slow, solemn nod. Then I reached into my own portfolio and pulled out a document I had prepared days ago. A document nobody in this room but me knew existed. I placed it on top of the others. My first official act, as the head of Meridian Haulage, I announced, is to make good on a promise my father made to his first employees, a promise he never had the chance to formalize. I slid the document toward the center of the table. This is a binding resolution to establish a 15% employee stock ownership plan, to be vested among all employees with 10 or more years of dedicated service. The people who built this company will now own a piece of it. I picked up the heavy fountain pen Avery had placed on the table, clicked off the cap, and signed the ESOP resolution with a firm, steady hand. My signature, not Damon's, was the first to mark the new era of the company. That act, that signature, was what finally broke my brother's spell. The sight of me creating a future he was not a part of shattered his paralysis, replacing it with a raw, primal rage. "You!" he screamed, his voice tearing through the quiet. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "You planned this. You stole this. You robbed me. This was mine." The two corporate security guards by the door tensed. Taking a half step forward, they looked to Avery, their eyes asking for instruction. Avery didn't even turn his head. He gave a single, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "The proceedings are orderly," he said, his voice cutting and calm, directed at the guards but meant for Damon. "We are simply executing a legal decision. Mr. Callow," he used the formal title, a subtle, brutal confirmation that Damon was now an outsider. I looked at my brother, at the wreckage of his ambition. There was no triumph in me, only a deep, weary sense of finality. I decided to offer him one last chance, a single, narrow path out of the inferno of his own making. "Damon," I said, my voice even, "there is a way for you to walk out of this room with a shred of dignity. I am prepared to authorize an honorary severance. You would resign quietly, effective immediately. In return, you would be granted a small, symbolic, non-voting share package. The sole condition is your full, immediate, and legally binding agreement to repay the fraudulent 3% fee from the now voided Shellridge deal." As I spoke, the notary public, acting on a prior instruction from Avery, placed a single-page document outlining the offer on the table in front of Damon's seat. It was a lifeline, a chance to retreat, to salvage something, to admit defeat without complete annihilation. He stared at the paper. The entire room watched him. This man who had been their presumptive king just 10 minutes ago. The silence stretched, measured by the slow tick of the clock on the wall. I counted 13 seconds in my head. His face, which had been a mask of rage, slowly hardened into something uglier, pure, spiteful resentment. His hand shot out and snatched the paper from the table. He didn't even read it. He ripped it in half, then in quarters. His knuckles white, he threw the pieces to the floor like confetti at a funeral. The notary public, her face impassive, made a meticulous note in her ledger, documenting the offer and its violent refusal. Avery Pike's voice was like ice. "Let the official record show," he stated, "that the conditional offer of a settlement has been clearly and demonstrably refused. As per Section 7.3 of the decedent's will, this act constitutes a final rejection of any and all claims to the estate, thereby voiding any and all potential minor bequests or symbolic considerations that might have been otherwise granted." With one single, spiteful tear, Damon had erased himself from our father's legacy completely and forever. The air had turned sour. The business was concluded. I looked past my brother's slumped shoulders to Lyle Henderson. "Lyle," I said, "is there anything you'd like to say?" Lyle stood, his tall frame straight and proud. He looked at the drivers, then at the board. His voice was not loud, but it filled the room with its simple, honest gravity. "For a long time," he said, "we were told this company was about a name, about legacy. Today, I think we learned it's about something more important. It's about being able to do our jobs right, and do them safe. At Meridian, we get to go home to our families. That's the only legacy that matters to us." His words were a signal, a release. Frank Miller, the union head, pushed his chair back and stood up. Then David Renwick from Northlake. Then, in the back of the room, one by one, then in small groups. The drivers and the dispatchers rose to their feet. There was no applause. There were no cheers. There was only a quiet, powerful sense of resolution. They turned, and as a single, unified body, they began to file out of the room. The sound of their work boots and shoes on the hardwood floor was a steady, rhythmic cadence. It was not a retreat. It was an advance. It was the sound of the company, my company, marching toward the future, leaving my brother behind in the past. When the room was empty, there was only me, Avery, the notary, and Damon, who had collapsed into a chair, a king in a kingdom of one. I reached forward and signed the 2 documents that made it all official: the transfer of Meridian haulage, the deed to the Crestline house. Then, I reached out and picked up the old brass key from the table. I closed my fist around it, the metal cool against my skin. It felt the same, but it was different. It was heavier now. The weight of every truck, every contract, every life that depended on this company was now concentrated in that single piece of metal. I slid the key into my pocket. The weight had shifted. The balance had been paid. The aftermath of the storm was not chaos, but a swift and silent series of procedures. The moment the last of the drivers had filed out, leaving the harbor room in a state of stunned quiet, the mechanisms I had put in place began to turn. There was no shouting, no argument. There was only the quiet, efficient process of a clean break. Avery Pike gave me a single, curt nod, then began packing his documents into his briefcase with the unhurried precision of a man who has seen it all before. The notary public was already stamping her final documents, her presence a silent testament to the legality of the proceedings. I made a single call on my cell phone to Linda Harris, our head of human resources, whom I had asked to be on standby. "Linda," I said quietly, "please proceed." 2 minutes later, Linda entered the room. She was a consummate professional, her expression neutral and unreadable. She walked directly to the chair where Damon was slumped, a man hollowed out by the sudden, violent amputation of his future. She did not offer condolences or apologies. She placed a simple, thick manila envelope on the table in front of him. "Damon," she said, her voice formal but not unkind, "this is your final paperwork. It includes all the necessary information regarding severance and benefits." Beside her, one of the corporate security guards, a tall, impassive man named Frank, cleared his throat gently. "I'll need your access badge, Mr. Callow," he said. Damon didn't seem to hear him. He just stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. After a moment of silence, Frank reached over and gently unclipped the badge from Damon's suit jacket. He held it up to a small, handheld reader, a single. Soft beep confirmed its deactivation. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 12:01 p.m. Simultaneously, at the boardroom table, I typed a single command line into the administrative terminal of Spine and pressed enter. "Execute. Terminate user DC1. The response was instantaneous. A log entry appeared on my screen, visible only to me. User DC1 terminated. All network and physical access rights revoked. User data archived to secure server. My brother was now, in every sense that mattered to this company, a non-entity. The excision was complete. My next act was not to celebrate, but to build. The company needed stability. It needed a clear voice of leadership, and it needed it now. I sat at the head of the long glass table, in the seat my father had once occupied, and began to type. It was a letter, addressed to every employee and every client of Meridian Haulage. It was direct, honest, and unambiguous. "My name is Renee Callow," it began. "As of 11:45 a.m. today, I have assumed the role of President and CEO of Meridian Haulage. I know today's events may have been unexpected for some, but I want to assure every one of you of my unwavering commitment to the core principles on which my father, Clive Callow, built this company: reliability, integrity, and above all, safety. The Blue Gate Protocol is not just a policy, it is the bedrock of our promise to our employees that they will return home safe every day, and to our clients that their trust in us is well placed, to honor the dedication that has built this company. I am also proud to announce my first official act: the immediate formation of a 15% employee stock ownership plan for all tenured staff. This is our company, and we will build its future together." Before I even hit send, my phone buzzed with an incoming email. The sender was David Renwick. The subject line, "Partnership." I opened it. The message was short and to the point. "Renee," or should I say RC7, "after that performance, consider our contract renewed for an additional 3 years, effective immediately. Furthermore, we are writing in a 7-figure annual safety bonus, payable to Meridian at the end of any fiscal year with a 0-incident record. Let's get to work." I smiled. A small, tired, but genuine smile. The numbers were already speaking. I left the empty conference room and took the elevator down to the ground floor. But instead of going to my old office, I pushed through the heavy doors and walked out into the yard. The familiar sounds washed over me: the low rumble of idling engines, the hiss of air brakes, the clang of steel on steel. The air smelled of diesel and asphalt. It smelled like home. I didn't make a speech. I just walked, my hands in my pockets, moving through the lanes of trucks. A mechanic sliding out from under a chassis wiped his greasy hands on a rag and gave me a thumbs up. A young dispatcher crossing the yard with a clipboard gave me a wide, relieved grin. Then I saw Lyle Henderson climbing into the cab of his rig for an afternoon run. He was methodically fastening his seatbelt, a motion as ingrained as breathing. He caught my eye through the windshield. He didn't smile. He just gave a single, firm nod, a gesture of profound, unspoken respect. It was worth more than a standing ovation. I was heading back toward the main building when I saw him, waiting for the executive elevator. Damon. He was holding a small cardboard box containing the few personal items from his desk. The security guard stood a respectful 10 feet away. He must have been waiting for me. As I approached, he looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed but filled with a cold, searching anger. "You planned this," he said. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. "Every step, from the very beginning, you wanted this, and you planned it all." He needed me to be a villain. He needed a conspiracy to explain his own failure. I stopped in front of him, close enough to see my own reflection in the polished marble wall behind him. I kept my voice low, devoid of triumph. "I didn't plan for your choices, Damon," I said. "I only planned for the company's survival. My father's will was about promises. I kept my promise to the people who work here. The lawyer simply kept my father's words." The elevator doors chimed, sliding open with a soft whoosh. He stared at me for a long moment, searching my face for the satisfaction he expected to find there, but there was none. There was only a quiet finality. He stepped into the elevator, the security guard following behind him. The polished steel doors slid shut, and for a brief second before they closed completely, I saw my own reflection. My face was calm, my expression unreadable. Not a flicker of a tremor, not a hint of a smile. Just resolve. The break was clean. The break was total. As I turned to walk away, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text message from Avery Pike. As always, it was concise and to the point. "Final step. Formal handover of the Crestline property this afternoon, 4 p.m. The last piece of the legal machinery was turning into place, the final transfer of the weight. I looked at the message, at the clean black text on the white screen. The battle was over. The long, hard work was just beginning. I typed a single word in reply and hit send. "Ready," The afternoon sun of late autumn slanted through the tall windows of the Crestline house, cutting the dim, quiet air of the living room into shafts of gold. Dust motes, ancient and undisturbed, danced in the beams like unspoken words, a silent history of the house hanging in the air. The room smelled of old books, beeswax, and the faint, lingering scent of my mother's potpourri, a ghost of a memory in the still air. It was a house that had been holding its breath, and was only now, finally, beginning to exhale. Avery Pike stood beside the great oak dining table, the same table where my father had unrolled maps and I had pored over spreadsheets. He was a creature of law and procedure, and this was the last procedure, the final, quiet stamp on the loud, chaotic events of the day. He placed a single, final document on the polished wood. It was a simple declaration of ownership, the legal capstone to the entire affair. He slid it toward me, his movements as precise and final as the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. My eyes scanned the dense text until they found the line at the bottom. Waiting. Sole managing owner. Meridian haulage. I picked up the fountain pen Avery had set out. The scratch of the nib on the thick cotton paper was the only sound in the room. I signed my name, Renee Callow, a name that was now, irrevocably, the company. Through the window, I could see my brother. Damon was standing out on the wide, covered porch, his back to the room. He wasn't looking out at the valley, at the empire he had lost. He was staring down at the brick-lined flower bed my mother had planted and tended to with such care 2 decades ago. The roses were dormant now, thorny and bare in the autumn light. He stood perfectly still, a silhouette of loss, a man who had become a stranger in his own home. He had no more words. I laid the pen down and reached into my pocket, my fingers closing around the familiar, worn shape of the old brass key, the key I had held for comfort, for strength, for a connection to the past. I placed it on the table beside the signed document. It represented the fight, the long, quiet war that was now over. I pushed it gently across the table to Avery, a final surrender of an old burden. In return, he reached into his own pocket and produced a new key. It was silver, sharp-edged, the teeth freshly cut and precise. He laid it in my open palm. It was cool and solid, heavier than it looked. Engraved along the flat of the key was a single, clean word, spine. It was the key to the house, but it was also the key to the future, a future I had built. As my fingers closed around it, my phone, which was sitting face down on the table, buzzed softly. I picked it up. 2 messages had arrived in the last minute. The first was from the newly appointed chairman of the board. It was just a single emoji, a thumbs up, a simple, modern signal of support and allegiance. The second was a text from David Renwick at Northlake Foods. It read, "First shipment under the new agreement is en route. Welcome aboard. RC7. The machine was already running. The work was already happening. I took the signed documents, squared them into a neat stack, and slid them into a dark blue portfolio that lay on the table. I closed the cover. The 2 halves came together with a soft, definitive click. It was the sound of a case being closed, a final, quiet full stop at the end of a very long sentence. Avery Pike, who had been watching me, gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "Clive would be proud. Renee," he said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. "He would be very proud." I didn't look at him. My gaze fell to the handwritten letter from my father, which still lay on the table. I reached out and let my fingertips rest on the paper, on the familiar loops and lines of his script. I didn't need to read the words aloud. They were written on my heart. Keep the people, and you keep it all. I stood up, the new key a solid, reassuring weight in my pocket. I walked to the great wooden door that led out to the porch and the world beyond. Avery followed, his work here finally done. I pulled the door closed behind us. As the latch clicked shut, the sound was immediately followed by another, more distant, more powerful sound from down the hill, in the yard. It was the sharp, reassuring hiss of a truck's air brakes being released, followed by the low, steady, powerful rumble of a diesel engine turning over, ready and safe for the long haul. Thank you for listening to this story. We'd love to connect with our audience, so please drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and share your thoughts on the story. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video, and to help us reach more listeners. You can give your support by hitting the hype button to make sure this story is heard by as many people as possible.